Welcome to the American Table Podcast, the podcast where we sit down with people from all over America to discuss the power food has to open up doors, spark important conversations, and change the world. I'm happy to announce that Annie Groer, veteran journalist of the New York Times, Washington Post, and CNN, has joined us here on our media platform. Annie will be doing podcast, video podcast, writing articles throughout her tenure here to ensure we have the highest standard of journalism here at the American Table.
I'm Annie Groer. I'm a longtime Washington journalist and a foodie. Billy, welcome to the American Table. It's so nice to catch up with you again. It, as you say, has been 40 years since we have had this ongoing relationship. And you were running the Gary Harts first presidential campaign. I was covering it for the Orlando Sentinel. Gary didn't get the nomination. Fritz Mondale got clobbered by Ronald Reagan. And you traded politics for philanthropy.
Yes, and actually, a lot of the skills that I learned in the campaign in terms of community organizing and fundraising and communications translated directly to the nonprofit work that I'm doing now.
So you and your sister Debbie started Share Our Strength, and in 2010, you launched the No Kid Hungry campaign. And now we are in the height of back to school season. And as No Kid Hungry keeps reminding us, food is the most important school supply. Talk a little about the history of what you're doing and the mission.
Yeah, Annie, we started Share Our Strength back in 1984. The catalyst was actually if you'll remember, this really catastrophic Ethiopian famine that occurred in late 1984. And there were lots of efforts to address it, like, We Are the World and Bob Geldof and USA for Africa. And my sister, Debbie was involved in the Heart campaign also, looked at those and thought they were fantastic, but knew that as a lot of celebrity-driven things are, that they would be gone after a while. And so the question for us was, could we create a more lasting institution? And so we thought that one of the things that we'd learned in politics was that everybody does have a strength to share. Literally, everybody has something to give. It might be money, it might be their time or their talent. And so we created Share Our Strength on that basis, and also on the conviction that hunger in the United States, even though we started doing a little bit of work in Ethiopia at the time, but that hunger in the United States was a solvable problem, that we have no shortage of food and we have no shortage of really effective food programs like the school meals programs and the SNAP food stamp program. And so we've over the last 40 years been funding community efforts all across the country. And at one point before the pandemic, it actually reduced childhood hunger to its lowest levels. Today, we have about 13 million kids who.
And what were those lowest levels? If you've got 13 million hungry kids now, what were you significantly?
Well, so there's lots of different ways to measure, and it's a little bit confusing because we have 13 million kids who are at risk of hunger. We've got 44 million Americans who are on the food stamp program, so that's also an indicator of food insecurity. We use measures that really don't measure hunger in the physiological sense. They measure it in kind of a socioeconomic sense, that we ask families, do they feel at risk of not being able to feed their kids well? So of the measure that the government uses, which actually a new one comes out on September 4th, just a few days from now, the measure of kids who present with what they call very low food security, actually miss a meal, is a number that's down to some 250,000 families. So that's a pretty low number. There's still kids who are, nutritionally undernourished, but not that many that are actually missing meals.
But to make clear what your mission is, you don't actually provide meals for kids or for adults, veterans, seniors. You work with an existing infrastructure in communities, in schools.
Yep.
How exactly does that work?
So think about it this way. There's 22 million kids in the country who get a free or reduced price school lunch. All 22 million are eligible for breakfast. But when we looked at this a few years ago, only 9 million of the 22 million were getting breakfast. At lunch, kids are already in school. At breakfast, they had to get there before school started and go to the cafeteria. And that was a big obstacle for a lot of families. And there was a stigma attached to doing that. But the catch is, and the crazy thing is, and you and I, being kind of creatures of Washington, know that, we're constantly fighting battles about budget and spending and so forth. It's bought and paid for all 22 million. This is an entitlement program. The money is just sitting there. bipartisan support, no argument about it. So we started to think about what are the barriers to kids getting these meals? And we realized that if we did one, it sounds like a simple thing. It turned out not to be simple, but we did it anyhow. If we moved breakfast from the cafeteria before school started to the classroom after school started, in the first period, feed kids in the classroom, actually, instead of the cafeteria, we added over 3 million kids in a very short period of time to school breakfast. So we're always looking for what are the barriers standing between kids and families who are eligible for these food benefits and them actually receiving them.
So over the years, as you have raised money from individuals, from corporate partners, from chefs, from restaurants, the money, if it doesn't go directly to meals, what does it do?
Yeah.
So if I run a feeding program.
Yeah. So for example, to take the schools, because that's where we work the most intensively. If schools are going to move breakfast from their cafeteria to their classroom, they're going to need to transport the food in carts on wheels. They're going to need somebody to clean up at different times of the day. They're going to need all types of if they're going to feed twice as many kids as they were, they're going to need more cafeteria staff, even though the cafeteria staff are not serving kids in the cafeteria, they're serving them in the classroom. So the food is 100% federally reimbursed. Everything else has to be paid for, and we pay for a lot of it through grants to school districts. We fund over 2,000 school districts in the United States, and we also fund Boys and Girls Clubs and Parks and Recreations departments and Big Brothers and Big Sisters. Another interesting example, just because we're talking about this at the end of the summertime, is when the schools are closed in the summer, the school meal delivery system is completely broken. And so the number of kids that get fed in the summer goes down to, just fewer than 13% of all the eligible kids of the 22 million. So you're talking about a very small fraction of kids. And we advocated that Congress, instead of trying to feed kids at Boys and Girls Clubs and these other places that they didn't have familiarity with necessarily, that we increase their benefits, their SNAP benefits in the summertime. And Congress passed in December 2022 a $29 billion authorization over the next 10 years to increase benefits for families. But here's the but. Where does our money come in? States have to opt into that program. There's administrative expenses to opting in and so forth. And so we're actually giving our money to states to buy software, to buy consulting from Deloitte and Accenture and McKinsey, and whatever they need to do to be part of this program. So far, 37 states have opted in.
Which means that 13 states have not opted in.
Have not, and it's the first year of the program. I think more of them will opt in next year. There were 1 or 2 states that wanted to make a very strong, ideological, political point that we don't have welfare in our state. But some of the states just couldn't, get everything in place quickly enough to do it, and we're working very closely with them. So that's where our funds go. Again, we don't have to purchase the food because the federal government reimburses 100% of the food costs.
Right. So you worked in the Senate for many years, and it's now about as toxic a place, the House and the Senate, and it's now a toxic place as we've seen in a long, long time. And we're in the middle of an extremely contentious presidential campaign. Are you confident that what you need done in Congress will get done?
I am confident. There's been a lot of bipartisan support for these feeding programs for a long time. The school meals programs that we've been discussing were actually started after admirals and generals came to Congress after World War II and said, our troops, this was in 1946, they said to Congress and Harry Truman, our troops were not strong enough and fit enough by the end of the war. We need to start feeding kids in school, and we need to feed them better. That's where all this began. So there's always been that level of bipartisan support. And even the summer meals program that I just described, this $29 billion authorization, had the strong support of Senator Bozeman from Arkansas. We've always had bipartisan support. And my hope is that what we do is almost like a little oasis of civility and bipartisanship, and a place where we can show that it is possible for the parties to work together. And as you know, the vice presidential nominee on the Democratic side, Tim Walz, has made a big point of talking about how in Minnesota they made school meals universal, and that they did not, they didn't banish books, they banished hunger in the classroom. And so I think whichever party prevails, there will continue to be bipartisan support for this.
Well, and also this is a great help to farmers who are producing the food. it's a place for it to go.
Absolutely. That's always been, frankly, kind of the deal with
Aaron?
the agriculture appropriations, and the farm bill every year is a big, big part of the farm bill is these food stamp benefits.
Tell me about the effect of the pandemic in 2020, because everybody was completely knocked over.
Yeah.
How did it affect you all?
So it affected us in two ways. One is, for the first time, there was an increased awareness of how many Americans were dealing with hunger. If you can remember back to the early days of the pandemic, there were these photographs that were viral in news publications of long lines at food banks and thousands of cars lined up because people weren't working. They didn't have access to groceries. As many as 60% of the people who were lining up for food assistance, they were doing it for the first time in their entire lives. They'd never needed it before. So there was a huge spike in awareness, which drove a huge spike in contributions to Share Our Strength and our No Kid Hungry campaign. Our revenues actually went from 82 million in 2019 to 162 million in 2020. There was that much generosity at all levels. So that was an important thing. But the other thing that it did is it gave us certain flexibilities that we'd been advocating for a long time. So, for example, we'd gone to Congress to say, the summer meals program isn't working, and during the pandemic, kids can't go to these places anyhow.
Right.
Let's increase the SNAP benefits, the food stamp benefits. And they did in a very small pilot program, maybe $35 to $40 million worth. So it didn't reach very far, but it worked so well that that's what led to that $29 billion authorization that I was describing. So it gave us a chance to create proof of concept in real time. And Congress at the time, as we all were so desperate to try things to alleviate the suffering, that they went along with this, even though they had never gone along with it before. During the pandemic, they were like, okay, if you say you need this, you have it. And it gave us the proof of concept that we've been able to build on since.
So essentially, Share Our Strength and No Kid Hungry are you're a laboratory as well as an infrastructure resource, a policy lab, if you will.
I think that's very well said, because we can, nonprofits can do things probably that government can't do, in terms of we can innovate and we can take risks and we can be a little closer to the people in the communities that we serve. But when we do have an idea that needs to be scaled up, we have the infrastructure to do that, but we need the public support. That's where, government comes in. So yeah, I think you said that exactly right.
But when we talk about infrastructure, you're also talking about, beside food carts, maybe somebody needs a commercial range, maybe somebody needs a walk-in cold room. Is that the sort of things that your grants also provide?
Yeah, certainly for food banks and community emergency feeding programs, we do all of that. So we've funded historically a lot of food banks who they need walk-in freezers, they need forklifts, they need transportation, they need staffing. Again, the food gets donated to them. They're not often buying food, although sometimes to ensure more nutritional value today, they are buying food in bulk. But yeah, we pay for those other costs pretty much.
So one of your earlier ideas for raising money, and it's been $1.3 billion in the last 40 years, was to reach out to chefs. Tell me how that went and why.
Well, from the very beginning, Annie, we thought that chefs might feel a connection to the issue of hunger, since they made their livelihoods from feeding people. And so we started to reach out to chefs. Actually, one of the people that I knew from the Gary Hart campaign, where you and I met many, many years ago, was Steve Wozniak, who was credited with inventing the Apple Macintosh. And I reached out to him because we had just started Share Our Strength. We had no money, we had no equipment. He donated an Apple Mac and something called a daisy wheel dot matrix printer, which was most people wouldn't even recognize today. But we cranked out what's that?
A museum piece.
Yes, a museum piece. We cranked out about 1,000 letters to chefs and restaurateurs, and we literally got not a single response. And that was very distressing. I remember actually confronting the mailman on our block and accusing him of stealing our mail or not delivering it, because I couldn't believe that nobody responded. But we sent out a second 1,000, and we got one response with a check for $500 from Alice Waters, iconic chef from Chez Panisse in Berkeley, California. And she sent $500 in a note saying, let me know what else I can do. And I immediately wrote her back and I said, you could sign the letters because nobody answers mine. And she did. Then we ended up with about 50 chefs, and we wrote to each of them and asked them to reach out to their networks. So kind of classic, concentric circle marketing strategy. But we ended up with quite a number of chefs who in fact were passionate because they fed people for a living, passionate about trying to alleviate hunger, and very high-end chefs, the best chefs in every city. The other thing we did, and I think you're going to talk to my sister and she can share this with you as well, but we reached out to restaurant critics in different communities and we asked them who are the chefs that are active on these issues, and they would tell us, or in some cases they had very close relationships with the chefs, and they would say, tell them I called. And we realized that when we called a chef and said the restaurant critic said to call you, they were very responsive.
Right.
And
self-interest here.
Yeah, and so they've been the core for many, many years. They've been the core of what we do, and they not only cook at food and wine benefits, at dinners for us, at taste events where 30 or 40 chefs will show up and demonstrate and cook their, whatever their best menu item is. They do smaller dinners for us. Many of them have taught nutrition education and cooking skills for low-income families, and they've been an asset that we've leveraged when we go to other corporate partners. So, for example, Citi is a big corporate partner of ours, and they are hoping that chefs and restaurateurs will accept the Citi Visa card, and they would love the checks to have the restaurants to have a check presenter that says we prefer Visa. So we've leveraged chefs and restaurants in all these different ways.
And don't restaurants also do their own events where if you come in X week or X month, a portion of your bill will go to Share Our Strength, or they will donate?
Yeah, they do it. There's lots of different ways they can do it. So some do pick a time and do a portion of the month. Some create a signature item on their menu. If you order the key lime pie, the $4.50 will go to Share Our Strength. They do it lots of different ways. Some just do a roundup. When your bill comes, if it's $94 and you want to round up to $100, the $6 will go to Share Our Strength. So we give them kind of a menu of options for ways that they can participate.
Oh, that's terrific. And tell me about what it's like to work with a sibling and have that relationship last for 40 years.
Yeah. Well, for us, it's been pretty easy. It's probably easier for the two of us than it maybe is for the people around us because they've got to deal with both of us on things. But no, Debbie and I, over time, we've come to, if we didn't always think alike, we've come to think alike about a lot of things. We just kind of understand each other's instincts, and we've had a lot of shared experiences. And I would say we have different, but, complementary skills. Debbie is just like a consummate organizer. She's a cold caller. She'll reach out to people. She's not afraid to pick up the phone. We've had times where we'll start to launch an effort to recruit chefs or restaurateurs, and some of our staff will send emails or direct messages on Instagram, and they won't get much of a response. And Debbie will, get a response from 8 out of the 10 people she was supposed to target because she just picked up the phone and called them. So she's really, really good at organizing and just really passionate about what we do. So yeah, for us, it's been fun. We're the only two siblings in our family. Our parents just had the two of us, and so we've stayed very close all these years. We had one argument about 3 years in, I remember, and stopped talking to each other for about a week, and that paralyzed the organization. And we realized that we could never do that again. People didn't know if it was I can't even remember what it's about, but people didn't know if they could come into my office or go into her office, or everybody was just, as I say, completely frozen until we got past it. So I think we just decided whenever we disagree, we'll just keep it to ourselves and we won't argue with the staff. Yeah.
And so what do we have to look forward to at the end of this year and into next year for initiatives that you all might be doing for fundraising or outreach?
Yeah, we've got some great events coming up. We tend to have a lot of our events in the springtime, although I know we've got an event coming up in New York at one of Danny Meyer's restaurants. I think it's at the Modern in October. We do these really fabulous kind of gala dinners in New York, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. the last couple of years in D.C. And you should come, Annie. You could be our guest. We do it at the National.
I'll come as a reporter.
Oh, yeah, you got it. You got to come. We do it at the National Cathedral. We actually rent the National Cathedral for a night. They move out all the pews. They put in tables. chefs come and cook. It's stunning with the light coming in from the stained glass windows. So they tend to be, just like really, honestly, very high quality, well produced events. And people come and they get we have a program, and some of the people who've been impacted by our work get up and speak about it. And so people get a connection to, what their dollars are actually supporting.
Has the pandemic and the increased cost of living and higher prices of food and all of that affected your fundraising?
No, I don't think it's really affected our fundraising. We're, in some ways, we're kind of weirdly a counter-cyclical organization, because people understand when either when there's a recession or when the economy is struggling or when there's inflation, many people understand that people are actually hurting more. And so oftentimes our donations increase. As we're speaking this morning, you and I, on September 4th at 9 o'clock this morning, the USDA just released new food insecurity statistics. And they show that food insecurity actually increased significantly this year over last year and the year before. So I think people are, will continue to be aware of the fact that we need their support.
Did they give a reason? Did they explain why?
They didn't. They reached these their data based on a battery of about 18 questions they asked families that are more socioeconomic in nature. Were there times at the end of the month where you struggled to make ends meet, or you weren't assured that you could afford healthy food? And so they just they reported in a pretty straightforward way every year, just like what those responses were.
In these 4 decades, do you have a sense that even people who are struggling are trying to move to a more nutritious diet, maybe get rid of some of the processed food, the junk food, and feed their families in a way that will make them healthier?
Yeah, no question about it. I think every parent wants the same thing, which is to be able to, provide healthy and nutritious food for their kids. Unfortunately, calories are a lot cheaper than protein and than vegetables and then produce. And so you tend to see a lot of families buying high calorie items that they know will give their kids energy, even if they're not healthy for them. But there's been so much attention to it, and most of the hunger programs, and I credit a lot of the food banks, the Feeding America food banks that we work very closely with, they've gotten very focused on making sure that they're supplying healthy foods, that they're recruiting providers of healthy foods and nutritious foods, that they're providing education for families. So it'll take a while to see that change completely, but it's really improved quite a bit.
Well, I know that you speak very widely about what you all do, and some of that outreach is to kids,
Yes.
and they're really a wonderfully receptive audience. They totally get what you do, but how actually do kids can they get involved, and at how young an age, and what do they do?
Yeah, I think kids can get involved, and they really have a strong sense of kind of the injustice of other kids being hungry. They're also very wise, Annie. As you raise that, it makes me think back to when I was a few years ago when my son was in 6th grade. His teacher asked me to come talk to the class about our work at Share Strength. And of course, I said yes right away. I should have known to check with my son first, because it turned out to make it the most embarrassing day of his life,
Oh God,
having his dad in the classroom.
Here?
Yeah, but as I was talking about this, one little boy raised his hand and he said, Mr. Shore, he said, I'm curious, have you found a way to help children and families without embarrassing them? Which I thought was a really interesting question. And another little boy raised his hand and he said, a 6th grader, and he said, at Share Our Strength, do you actually get to see and know the families that you help? And do they feel seen, or do they feel invisible to you? So, I mean, these are really profound questions that go to the dignity of the way these programs work. And adults never ask them, honestly. Only kids ask them. So, there are ways, obviously, for kids to get involved. But, the most important part for me is the wisdom that we can take from children in terms of how we deliver these services.
So if you've got like a 6 or 7-year-old who wants to help, what do you say? Run a bake sale?
We actually have a program called the Great American Bake Sale, and we've had lots of kids. It's raised millions of dollars, so we do that. We do programs. We've done programs in the past where families come and do like cookie decorating together. Also, just service projects, to go to a food bank or to go to a pantry and to package food and to get it ready for delivery and that type of thing gives kids a real feel in a hands-on way for why this is important.
So, since we're talking about kids, let me conclude with a question about your own culinary journey.
Oh, my.
You know what's coming. And the fact that vegetables were and may still be your least favorite food group. I believe the last time you and I shared a meal, which was at our friend Kathy's wedding,
Yes,
everything on your plate was brown, beige, or white, with the possibility of corn. At that time, I think corn was your only vegetable.
that was probably it.
And
Well,
then you started getting hammered by all your top chefs who said, "Excuse me, this is not an example."
I partly got hammered because you wrote an article about what was it? It was about picky eaters or
Adult picky eaters.
adult picky eaters. But I don't think you know this, Annie, but I got to some degree featured in this article. It must have been 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, I wrote it for the Washington Post.
And I started to get calls from eating disorder institutes around the country. Seriously, I got quite a few of them, and they were like, "We can help you. You can be a spokesperson for us if our treatments are successful." And I really heard from a number of hospitals, and I've never gotten even with you for that, but I will find a way to.
Sorry.
But I've improved. We actually have. I'm at a cottage in Maine right now. I commute to DC from here, and we've got a garden that has arugula, Brussels sprouts, spinach, all of which I plant and eat. So you'd be very proud of me.
Bravo. That is such great news. So, Billy, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for all you do and for joining us at the American Table to tell the story of Share Our Strength, No Kid Hungry, and all your other programs. So now it's time for me.
I'm so glad you're doing this.
Thank you.
I just think this is such an important podcast because food is connected to everything that we care about. It's connected to our health, our climate, our, hunger issues. And so I'm very excited that you're leading this podcast.
Well, thank you. And to all the viewers, readers, and listeners out there, if you like what we do here at the American Table, consider supporting our work with a paid subscription. $5 a month, $50 for a year for dishy, festive, and illuminating bonus content. And since this is the start of the 2024-25 academic year, you can also learn how Share Our Strength and No Kid Hungry helps millions of students at risk of hunger get enough to eat. And as they say at No Kid Hungry, food is the most important school supply. Thanks so much, Billy.
Thanks, Annie.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the American Table podcast. If you enjoyed it, please leave us a rating or review on Spotify or Apple Podcast. Be sure to visit the American Table on Substack for more stories about the intersection of food and politics, and to get access to our exclusive articles, recipes, bonus podcast episodes, and award-winning American Table original films and video content. Join the American Table as a paid subscriber for just $5 a month or $50 a year. Until next time, I leave you with a quote from Anthony Bourdain. Barbecue may not be the road to world peace, but it's a start. Thank you for joining us.